The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-host and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on our live shows.
Broadcast for shooters, hunters, and gun enthusiasts. This is the Firearms Radio Network. The bandwidth for this episode of This Week in Guns is sponsored by Patriot Patch Company. PatriotPatch.co.
Welcome to This Week in Guns. This show is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network and Patriot Patch Company.
And this show offers commentary on the latest firearms industry news, information, and buzz. I'm your host, Sean Herron, and I've got a panel of three that I'm pretty excited about tonight. Starting off is one of our first-timers. She's the senior spokesmom and blogger for 1 Million Moms Against Gun Control and co-host on To the Republic with Tim Knight. Rebecca Schmoe, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
That rhymed. I've been planning that all day. Next up, you know him, you love him. He's a veteran, Second Amendment advocate, professional rabble-rouser, and author of American Insurgent, which I was just recommending the other day, and host of the Matter of Facts podcast, Phil Rabelais. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me back.
Always a pleasure, sir. And next up, it's a name you might recognize. He's a Marine attorney. He loves iron sights, apparently. He's co-host of the AR-15 podcast and an original cast member of this show. Reed Snyder, how are you?
I'm well. Sean, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm glad to have you all here. Sorry we're running a little bit late. That is my fault. No one else's. I take full responsibility. I also take full responsibility of these advertisers. Patriot Patch Company, patriotpatch.co is the place you can go to check out all their cool stuff. Patch of the Month is one of my favorite things. And Second Call Defense. We talk about a lot of stories about self-defense on this show, and having some kind of insurance is definitely a good idea. Find out more. Just check it out. See what you think at firearmsradio.tv/SCD. Let's get right into the show. First up, armed citizen stops potentially deadly attack in a Best Buy parking lot. I was actually listening to this one be dictated to me while I was driving back from the range. And three people decide they're going to steal stuff from Best Buy. Two of them get out the door. Best Buy Loss Prevention stops one of them. And then they get in their car and start to charge people who were in the parking lot. Back up, looked like they were going to charge again. Lawful concealed carrier in Oklahoma draws his firearm, points it at it. The guy driving the car raises his hands, then speeds away and takes off. It turns out these guys are from Houston. They were just down there gambling, whatever, and they believe they know who they are. There was an interesting quote in here that I actually thought. Sergeant Lewis said police don't encourage civilians to draw their weapons because it could result in worsening an already dangerous situation. However, in this case, he said the bystander was well within the law. And just a point of clarification, you don't have to have a permit to conceal carry there either. So, kind of all good things. Reed, I'm going to start off with you. What are your thoughts on the story as a whole, lawful use of a firearm, what the cop said about that, and just the whole thing in general?
You know, this is something that I've thought about and just, my own daydreaming. I'm always afraid of the idea of an encounter that isn't an armed, firearm armed individual and me. Because, when do you consider the use of a vehicle something that says, I'm in fear of imminent deadly bodily injury or serious bodily injury or death? And, I think that it's something that you can easily cross that line and say, look, if you're driving a multi-thousand pound vehicle, I'm going to defend myself if I think you're going to run me over. But how does everybody else, how does the police view that? Is a near miss enough for me to, put a round through a windshield? Is a guy accelerating 100 yards away from me enough for me to be concerned? There's just so much that I don't think is clear in my mind, that it's just one of those nightmare situations. A guy draws a pistol and I think that, he's crossed the line, and this is just one of those gray areas that it makes me feel uncomfortable, but, I think I'm glad the way it turned out, because, you have to see other examples in play to kind of get a comfort level if you're going to actually be a concealed carrier. Know that you have to pull the firearm sometimes where it's not clear.
Yeah, 100%. In fear of death or serious bodily harm is generally what the law says. Rebecca, what are your thoughts here?
Honestly, if I were in that situation, if you don't have any other route to get away from the car that's coming at you, then I'm in fear for my life. And that's what I would stand on. The police officer mentioning that they don't encourage people to draw their weapon in self-defense kind of defeats the entire purpose of us having a self-defense weapon. And so I'm not surprised that they would say that. And I think it's a CYA kind of thing as far as the police officer goes. I think that they don't want vigilantes running around, and too many people think that that's what we are. So
I want more vigilantes running around. Phil, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I mean, to be polite, I think Sergeant Lewis is a moron. Let me just go ahead and out myself as that person, because I mean, I agree with what Rebecca says. The entire point of the Second Amendment is giving us the ability to defend ourselves and our fellow citizens, our neighbors against harm, whether that harm is being run over by a car or being shot by an assailant. It doesn't matter. Protect from harm. So for police officers say, I don't encourage people to pull their firearm because it might make a situation more dangerous. It's like, what's more dangerous than a person maybe getting run over by a car or killed? I don't call that making a situation more dangerous. I feel like it is confronting the threat of bodily injury with an equal threat of bodily injury to make somebody reconsider their life decisions. So if he's not in favor of that, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you should pick a citizen and follow them around 24 hours a day to make sure they're safe so nobody will have to draw their gun. Yeah. That said, I think it's inappropriate for the police officer to say it the way he did. That also being said, I do agree with what Reed said, though, because, I mean, this is one of those weird situations where, like, a lot of concealed carriers in their head, they have this, like, dirty, hairy, good guy, bad guy scenario where if this happens, I'm going to pull my gun and blow the guy away. And it doesn't work like that. Like, things are nuanced in real life, and things happen really, really fast. In this case, the person had to make a judgment about, is this vehicle more than likely trying to be used to run somebody over, and what's the level of harm to be caused? Does it justify me using my firearm? And the standpoint I always use when I try to, like, talk to relatively new concealed carriers is, I'm like, here's my question. Think about if you pull that gun, you're going to spend the next 6 months in jail. Whether or not it's really going to happen, let's just put that in your head. If you're going to spend 6 months in jail while the courts figure out if you were right or wrong, are you prepared to submit to that if you pull that gun? And if the answer is yes, you are probably within your rights to defend yourself, because you've made a judgment that this amount of pain and disruption of my life is worth utilizing the force to defeat something that might be worse than that. And if the answer is I don't know, the answer is no. You should leave your gun in the holster.
Yeah, and for me, there's three things that I generally try to understand ahead of time so I can react in a good situation. Is there ability, opportunity, and am I in jeopardy of death or serious bodily harm? Was there the ability? Absolutely. A car is stronger than a human body. And if they're using it as a weapon, absolutely. Opportunity. Did they have the opportunity? Were you in the path of their car? Did you have no reasonable method of escape? And then, ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. Yeah. And jeopardy is just, are you in jeopardy of death or serious bodily harm? So I think it met all of those things. I thought it was smart. And then he didn't even use the firearm and didn't pull the trigger and put it away.
Which is another good point, because, you know, I've heard it parroted more than once that, well, if my gun comes out the holster, it's going to get used. And I'm like, no, actually, if you really think about this realistically, your gun should be used to end a threat. If the threat is leaving the area at a high rate of speed, no longer threatening people, the threat has ended. You don't have to use your gun. It's not like a firecracker that once you light the fuse, it's going to blow up.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
All right, next story. Collin County becomes largest in Texas to affirm 2A rights. This is, I guess, somewhere in Texas. I don't actually know where that is. Is this a thing that's actually even a danger in Texas? Or Collins County Commissioners unanimously approved a resolution reaffirming support of the Second Amendment as a part of a broader restatement of their oaths of office. The sheriff and other county officials are also signing on to the document. So Texas is one of those kind of strongholds that you would expect this wouldn't be a thing, but it's also, you know, I think it's kind of cool. Reed, I'm going to start off with you.
Well, Texas is unique. I'm sure Phil will support me on this. We have
that's being very politically correct and saying yes.
We have Austin, the state capital, which is very left leaning in terms of population. It has a younger millennial crowd. It's a college town. And, you know, whatever percentage of the politicians that are Democrats in Texas go there every 2 years to tried to do more damage to the state. But, Plano is not in jeopardy. Collin County is not in jeopardy of being a leftist bastion of gun haters. In fact, I forget who the guys are that do the videos, but one of them talked about Plano being the gun capital of America in terms of per capita use. I don't know if his numbers are right, but it's hysterical to see them do that, because I don't think anybody here is in fear of losing their rights. But, more power to them. I think that it's nice to know where you can find that sanctuary. And I've been seeing more and more of these kinds of maps pop up. Doesn't Virginia have one that's identified a number of counties that are standing out in opposition to what's going on there?
Yeah. We've seen it kind of all over the U.S. over the last year and a half, 2 years. It is interesting.
It's funny, but I'm not afraid.
Yeah. Now, a handful of residents spoke against the resolution, calling it divisive and expressing fear of gun violence. Others said they found it reassuring. And this statement doesn't have any legal force or anything else. Phil, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I tend to agree with Reed. There are parts of Texas that are much, much, much more purple, bordering on, blue than a lot of people give credit to and credence to. And Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, those are not exactly the bastions of hardcore Second Amendment advocacy and support that I'd like to see them be. But I don't think Collin County is in any serious danger. What does frustrate me, though, is that this harkens back to a case that popped up a couple years ago where, what was it, Kansas or Kentucky, one of them? They passed a law stating that basically all federal level firearms laws were void within the state. And acting on this, a suppressor manufacturer within the state started stamping on their suppressors made in Kansas for Kansas use only in accordance with the law, because the federal government for years and years has said they can regulate firearms across state lines based on the Interstate Commerce Clause, which is flimsy at best. But that was their story, so Kansas called them on and said, fine, these things don't leave the state, so you can't regulate them. Well, lo and behold, the gentleman that made the silencer and one gentleman that purchased a couple of them both got picked up on federal firearms charges. And you know what? Guess where the state was when that happened? They weren't there to defend their citizens. The sheriff was not out there in the street to stop ATF and federal authorities from taking these men into custody. The state AG did not go to speak on these men's behalf. They were let to rot. So, my standpoint, every time I see a Second Amendment sanctuary state or county or whatever pop up like this, is I ask the question, I'm like, are you going to defend your citizens? Meaning, is your state police going to stand out there on the border and stop these people from coming in and taking your citizens by force at gunpoint for violating the laws that they claim you can't enforce anymore? If the answer is no, then stop all this virtue signaling nonsense. Just stop. Stop telling these people that you're going to be there to help them, because we both know you're not.
Phil, I have a question for you.
Oh, lay it on me, Reed.
No, we see the sanctuary cities when it comes to immigration. To me, if it says, all right, I'm a local official, if I see this federal violation going on, I'm not going to drop a dime. I'm not going to incorporate my, federal colleagues and let them know that something's going on. Is that
not
enough?
Good enough? Not good enough. No.
If they're gonna basically cross that line and say we're a sanctuary, and you want them to be fully committed to the idea of sanctuary.
Here's the problem. What does crossing that line mean? Does the police force have any skin in the game? Do the local politicians take any heat when they refuse to cooperate with federal authorities regarding sanctuary cities and illegal immigrants? Is there any consequence for it? No. And there's not any consequence if our state police or our local state politicians say, well, we're not going to dime out our citizens, because you're not helping. You're just refusing to throw them to the wolves, but you're not stopping them from being thrown to the wolves either.
Right.
So my point of view is, it's like when the state government from top to bottom has as much skin in the game as gun owners, then they can say this is the Second Amendment sanctuary county or parish or state or whatever. Then I will take this seriously, because at that moment, the state is telling me that if my butt's in the fire, their butt's in the fire with me. And I would support that and I would champion that. But this is not what's happening. What's happening is a lot of chest beating and virtue signaling, and at the end of the day, those gun owners are on their own if they violate the law. And I don't appreciate it.
It is only county government. I do think that, Governor Abbott might do it if he could figure out how to get it done.
He could figure out how to get it done if he would just let a part of his anatomy that has two swinging pendulums hang a little bit and preach on the stump that the Second Amendment says what it says, and there's no way to infringe upon it, and never should have been infringed upon in the first place.
Rebecca, what do you think?
Well, Kansas did leave a couple of our citizens swinging, kind of twisting in the wind. And Phil, you're absolutely right. The state did not step up and help them. And in fact, they're still going through stuff now. We're watching it daily in Kansas because Kansas is still considered, the entire state is basically a sanctuary state. But we also know here in Kansas that they did not protect those two individuals. What makes us think that they're going to protect us? It really is no teeth to these, there's no teeth to the virtue signaling. There is no backing anything up, but it is nice to see groups of people getting involved, which is what we need. We just need to translate that over to getting involved with the rest of voting and being involved on the daily level and contacting their representatives. And it's not enough to say, oh yeah, we're sanctuary, and then stop there.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm really glad you used the term virtue signaling, because that was definitely something I was thinking. I was like, it's virtue signaling. It's virtue signaling that I like, but it's virtue signaling nonetheless. And Phil, those, the things you were talking about hanging down, that was the uvula, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's two of them. Uvula hanging down. You got it. No, but I mean, and the truth of the matter is, I don't like virtue signal on any level. I consider it to be pretty limp-wristed and perfunctory, and I would rather a person sit there quietly and shut up if they don't intend to put their money where their mouth is. And if you open your mouth and say something, I expect you to back it up to the death if necessary. That's me personally. I think if you say something, be prepared. If you preach on the stump, be prepared to stand at the pulpit.
Love it. Firearms Policy Coalition asks court to rule that marijuana possession should not nullify gun rights. This comes to us from Maine. The Firearms Policy Coalition and Firearms Policy Foundation filed an amicus curiae brief in the Maine Supreme Judicial Court, sitting as the law court in the case of State of Maine versus Richard A. Tonini. Basically, this guy got pulled over just for a traffic infraction. He had a bag of weed sitting on his back seat. Cop said, "Hey, is that weed?" He was like, I guess it is. Then he said, "Oh, I have a couple firearms," and then he was taken into custody, I believe, at that point. Yeah. He admitted to possessing 2 firearms and was charged with furnishing scheduled drugs and being a prohibited person in possession of a firearm. Ultimately, he was acquitted of the scheduled drugs, but convicted of being a prohibited person in possession of a firearm. The Supreme Judicial Court invited interested parties to address 3 questions. Can a person who possesses marijuana be determined to be an unlawful user or addicted to any controlled substance within the meaning of the firearms possession prohibition? A bunch of numbers in state code. Federal code, right? What effect, if any, does an acquittal?
No, that's state.
Oh, Maine. Okay, yeah.
That's probably Maine revised statutes.
Okay, thank you. I knew it was a good idea to have an attorney on the show. What effect, if any, does? Hey, at least I knew a friend of the court, right?
Oh, yeah.
What effect, if any, does an acquittal on a charge of furnishing a scheduled drug? And then what is the test for evaluating constitutionality? Adam Kraut says, based on our research and as our brief explains, a person who merely possesses marijuana cannot automatically be deemed an unlawful user or addicted to a controlled substance. And Adam, by the way, now is the FPC Director of Legal Strategy, and he was the brief's lead author. He said nothing in the record indicates Mr. Tonini had previously ingested marijuana, was arrested for marijuana, or was addicted to marijuana. Further, based on the Supreme Court's straightforward categorical method for examining laws that infringe on rights protected protected under the Second Amendment, Mr. Tonini's right to keep and bear arms cannot be restricted. On the trial record, Rebecca, I'll start off with you here.
Well, if they couldn't prove that he was under the influence and it was technically legal, is it legal in Maine? I don't even know.
I don't think so. Well,
then why would he be charged with the having the guns, but not with the having of the marijuana?
He was charged with both, but only, what was it here? He was acquitted of the scheduled drugs, but convicted of being a prohibited person.
So now having guns is a bigger crime than having drugs, I guess.
Yes.
That's, I guess. And then if you have them both, then the drugs are okay, but not so much the guns.
Yeah.
It's just, that's a very confusing situation to be in.
It is. And I mean, this whole prohibited person, right? Like even on the federal form 4473, there is a section that asks, are you an unlawful user or addicted to any narcotics? And you have to answer that truthfully. If you don't answer it truthfully, then I can't sell you a firearm. Reed, I'd like to get your feedback here.
I think that you have a two-step inquiry, and I mean, this is just, my ivory tower, BS. It's, are you an unlawful user? And if you are, then if the statute says you can't have a gun, you can't have a gun. But if you're not an unlawful user and are acquitted of the charge, then you shouldn't get to the second inquiry because you've stopped the questioning. You're no longer in possession, or you're no longer an unlawful user. Personally, I mean, I don't have any appreciation for marijuana. It's not anything that appeals to me, but I don't know why it's even an issue in today's society. I can have a beer and I can have, firearms in my gun safe. I can't go out in the backyard and shoot them in the air, but, that's kind of understandable. Why is marijuana the thing that crosses the line in so many people's eyes? I just am waiting for the last generation who thought that was an issue to no longer be with us so that it's no longer an issue and people can just get on with it.
It's going to take about 20 more years.
Yeah. Okay. Is this where we say, okay, boomer?
You said it, not me.
Present company excluded, obviously. Phil, let freedom ring.
I'm a libertarian. I'm like 3.5 millimeters away from being an anarchist on most issues. I don't think the government has any business telling us we can and can't have guns, and I don't think they have any business telling us what we can or cannot put into our own bodies. So on that basis, I kind of think the government should shove it up their nose and leave this man alone. Quite frankly, if he wants to grow a plant in the backyard and light it on fire and inhale the fumes, it's his own freaking business. And I think, honestly, most people in the government would actually agree with me if I could sit him down long enough to get him to have a conversation about it. Because I have this argument with people all the time when I advocate for the legalization of not just marijuana, but everything. All in. Simply for the reason that this, right now we have an opioid crisis in this country and people are dying left and right due to opioids every day, heroin being the big one. But you go to, if you get heroin from a guy, from the back of a guy's trunk in the inner city, that's illegal as hell, and the government doesn't like that. But if you go to your doctor and then you go to your pharmacist and your insurance covers it, it's perfectly legal to have stuff made out of the exact same stuff. So I come from the perspective of if it's bad, then it's always bad, and if it's good, then it's always good. It's like the whole gun control argument. Well, guns are dangerous, so why do cops have guns? I mean, if they're so damn dangerous, they shouldn't have them either. Well, you can't do that. I'm like, well, why can't we have them too? Same thing with drugs. If drugs are bad, then they're always bad. It means you can't prescribe them either. Yeah. But no one's screaming and yelling about that, so I don't think we should mess with people about marijuana either. But that's just me. I
agree. Like, I voted to legalize marijuana here in Colorado. I don't use it. It's not a thing that I'm even really interested in. And I think that it's been absolutely devastating to our local economy and our homeless population. It's honestly awful. But I'm like you, Phil. I'm like 3 millimeters away from being an anarchist. So I'm like, yeah, let it all burn down, because that's how we generate regrowth. Reed, I have a question for you. I mean, clearly having a bag of weed on your back seat, one could jump to some conclusions as a critical thinker that he's probably an unlawful user of marijuana, right? Like, we could all jump to that. In court, that's not how things work, right? You have to have like evidence and you have to prove it.
Right.
So, but I mean, is this really just a game of semantics? Like, what is the real win here if this comes away?
Oh, it's absolutely a game of semantics. I mean, and if you're going to even look deeper into the policy, the law is not designed to punish the addict. I mean, that's what you're told. That's what the theory is. The law is to punish the guy that enables the addict. So he's the one that goes out and brings it into the country and sells it to the addict. All right, that's the dealer. The good dealer in heroin that Phil brought up is not the guy that goes out and does his own product, because then he will be a whacked out dead guy and he will have not made any money. So that makes him a bad dealer. But yeah, I think it's semantics. And honestly, in a lot of these instances, I think it's overzealous prosecutors and permissive procedural systems. I mean, obviously, if you have an if A then B system, then you can't have a B if there is no A. And so this is just someone letting it slide to get the guy on the gun charge.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, next story is an interesting one. We've talked about it a ton of times on here. But the National Sheriff's Association urges SCOTUS to rule against New York State Rifle Pistol Association. I think that headline is actually a little bit misleading here, because the sheriff group urges the Supreme Court to strike down New York City gun rules. National Sheriff's Association, leading a coalition of police and Second Amendment groups, urging the Supreme Court to strike down New York City's gun transportation rules. And just a brief reminder for those of you out there who aren't familiar with what the story is in New York, you are very restricted in where you can actually have your firearm and transport your firearm. If you have a pistol permit and you keep a pistol at your house, you can only take it to very specific places and nowhere else. If you have two homes, you cannot take it from one home to another home. You can drive to the range. You can't drive to the gas station, then the range. You could just drive to the range and home. And it's been very restrictive. This case was filed by the New York State Rifle Pistol Association, and I apologize if I get any specific details incorrect here, and saying that this is basically not lawful, legal, and they took it all the way to the Supreme Court. On the way to the Supreme Court, New York removed these laws because they were afraid on how the Supreme Court would rule on these. In my opinion, I don't think I've read anything official that said that, but excuse me, it makes sense. So they took out the laws, hoping that it would make this whole case moot, and the Supreme Court wouldn't actually hear it and talk about it and rule on it ultimately. So now the National Sheriff's Association says that they don't want it. They said, they argue in a brief before the justices that the public safety rationale the city uses to justify the rules does not have merit, and the court will hear a challenge to the city's transportation rules on December 2nd. The Supreme Court actually decided that it wasn't moot, even though the law was no longer in place. But I think that both sides, both gun control and anti-gun control, are kind of waiting with a little bit of bated breath. Now, next up on this same story, and I'll let you guys talk about all this, but Justice Alito asked if the Second Amendment only exists within the home. Now, Justice Alito is actually talking to the New York City attorney, whose last name is Deering, and he ends up trapping him. Justice Alito says, well, if it's viewed in that way, would it be consistent with the Second Amendment for the city to prohibit any trip by a person holding a premises licensed to a firing range? The attorney for New York City says, I think that would be doubtful. And the reason the city went beyond what the state law says about a premises license and authorized transport to shooting ranges in the city was because the city recognized that training does intersect with and is important to effective use of a handgun in the home. And that's when Justice Alito pounced and said, so you are conceding, I take it doubtful means that it would be unconstitutional. You can tell me if you don't know the answer to that question. But if it's what it means, you're conceding that the Second Amendment protects the possession of a firearm outside the home under at least some circumstances. New York City attorney kind of falls apart and he doesn't answer. It's a big non-answer, but he says so much without it. By a show of hands, who wants to talk about this one first? Take it away. Whoever talks first gets it.
It's for beauty. Go ahead, Reed.
Wait a minute. How do you know that I'm older? I think I'm prettier.
Educated guess.
All right. I think that the critical piece in this is the willingness of a court that has historically looked at moot issues as issues they're not willing to take on, and seeing this is important enough to address, even though the state has specifically taken steps to create a moot issue, is an important point. Now, I'm not really sure, as I'm sure nobody is, what is in the minds of the justices who decided that let's proceed on this. But, I think a lot of the amicus curiae briefs have pointed out that, hey, look, you can declare this moot. Next year, New York can reverse itself and we're back at this. And they can play that game until the end of days. So I think it is an important thing that the Supreme Court wants to take it up. I do think that we have a body that is capable of providing a good ruling, but, on the flip side, Roberts has become more of a swing voter, and we have and Roberts as the Chief Justice has in the past striven for cases that are not mere pluralities. He wants 6-3s and 7-2s, unanimous decisions. And I don't think we have a court composed of justices who will give him those. So we're still back to something that's going to flip-flop based on the composition of the justices. So I'm not really sure where it leaves us, but I am happy it's there. And I do like the fact that they got the New York Attorney General in our crosshairs. Yeah. That's kind of nice to see.
Yeah, I agree. Phil, I want to finish with you, so I'm going to go to Rebecca real quick.
Well, I'm in Kansas, so we're constitutional carry. Mm-hmm. All of this is completely foreign to what I am used to. We carry where we want, and even if we carry inside of a place that says not to carry, then the most that they can do is ask us to leave. And so it really is hard for me to wrap my mind around the fact that they're still covered by the Second Amendment. The whole point of bearing arms is that you're able to bear them. Yeah. And so it shouldn't have gotten to this place in the first place. The fact that we are having to have opinions given by the Supreme Court on whether or not it's constitutional for people to carry besides just their restricted areas, I don't know. That's a foreign concept to this Kansan.
Yeah, understood. Phil? I'm reading this comment. It says, I just tuned in and I'm hoping I'm in store for a Phil rant. I think it's about to happen.
Yeah, stand by. 3, 2, 1. Like you and I were talking about right before Reed and Rebecca joined us, I have multiple gripes with this, which I'm sure none will be very surprising to anybody that knows me remotely well. First of all, this law was absolutely a complete infringement upon the Second Amendment. Anybody that says otherwise is either intellectually dishonest, a liar, or a mongoloid. There's no middle ground in that. This is one of many very egregious laws and ordinances that comes out of a place like New York that it is very apparent to me that the deck has been stacked against gun owners for generations because even a lower court didn't want to look at this the correct way. More than one lower court, and this is one of the reasons why I'm glad this made up SCOTUS, but I'm simultaneously enough of a cynic not to think it's going to go anywhere. But many, many lower courts and district courts have not held the Second Amendment and not held challenges against these kinds of gun control laws to the proper standard. They refuse to use strict scrutiny, which is required for constitutional law. They want to apply the incorrect scrutiny so they can try to slide this in under the door, and I'm freaking sick and tired of it. So I am honestly hoping, not expecting, that SCOTUS finally freaking takes this up and slams the lower courts and tells them once and for all, you have got to apply strict scrutiny, period, end discussion. I would really love and do backflips and cartwheels down the street. And for a 250-pound man, that'd be a hell of a sight because I would break both legs and my neck doing it, but I'd pull it off just for this event. But I would love to see this SCOTUS come out and clearly enunciate really loud for the people in the back what the Second Amendment really freaking is. It is an uninfringible, unlimited right to carry arms inside and outside of the house, period, end discussion, and that be that. And then let's shred every gun control law from one side of the country to the next, federal, state, local, and everywhere in between, and let every one of the mountains that demand attention scream and cry in the corner until they all drown in their own tears. But I'm a cynic. I honestly am not expecting that. Because I've read enough of my own country's history, most of which was there well before I was ever thought of, and I've seen way too many things go to the Supreme Court and not be ruled on properly. 1936 U.S. v. Miller, if anybody's not familiar with that court case, they ought to teach it in freaking high schools as a perfect example of what happens when SCOTUS does not do what they're supposed to do. So I look at things like this. I'm hoping this goes our way. I'm really hoping they go further than the Heller decision, which in my opinion didn't go as far as it should have. I'd love to see the Second Amendment fully affirmed as what it is, and I'd love to see this law and every other law shredded, but I'm not enough of an optimist to think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think the best hopeful outcome out of this is we get a very narrow scope victory that smacks New York on the back of the hand, and they'll be right back to it tomorrow. because I just don't think the Supreme Court has the gonads to really and truly state what the Second Amendment is and always was and lay down the law. If I'm wrong, I'll eat my hat. One of y'all can suggest what condiment I use.
No, unfortunately, I'm with you. Gun sales did pretty good on Black Friday. The number of guns sold on Black Friday could arm the Marines.
Again.
Yeah.
This is like, what, the fifth or sixth time we've armed the Marine Corps with civilian firearm sales? I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Over 200,000 background checks. This was the second largest Black Friday in history. I was right at 202,000. Suddenly I've lost the number. But it was only like a couple thousand different, from the biggest one that had ever happened. And I think that's kind of interesting. And, you know, it says a lot about the country and the state of things. Rebecca, good thing, bad thing, indifferent?
Well, it's my favorite kind of shopping.
Yep. I agree.
I will not say whether or not I was one of those participating in the Black Friday, but, no, I think it's fantastic. We at Million Moms were constantly talking to ladies about, hey, you're right. It's your responsibility. You need to get trained. You need to get prepared to be able to protect yourself. And I know for a fact that we had a lot of ladies who were chiming in with the Million Moms thing saying we were part of being out there. We helped this. And so that for me is a very small victory, because there are more ladies out there taking responsibility for their protection. And let's be honest, it's a lot of fun. Absolutely.
Phil? Are you surprised by the Black Friday gun sales?
No, it gives me a warm feeling.
Yeah, I know, me too.
Can't quite describe where, but it gives me a warm feeling. Listen to me. It makes me so excited to see more and more people going out buying guns. And even the same freaking people that already have 10,000 guns, you own 10,001 now, so hallelujah to you.
Yep, absolutely. Reed, I mean, it's pretty exciting. A lot of them were probably AR-15s. And a lot of them probably had iron sights.
Well, you know, nowadays you can't tell. The SOBs keep dropping the iron sights off, so.
Well, most of the iron sights are plastic now.
Yeah, and that's not really iron. But, you know, I don't know. I think it just reaffirms what I've always thought, which is that basically most of the hype and the tripe and the, you know, rhetoric is just wrong. You know, you've got the people in the margins squeaking the wheel and they're getting a lion's share of attention, but this doesn't say that they're making any progress.
So absolutely true. And I often wonder, like, I see things, and someone actually just mentioned it. I was getting ready to bring it up. We hear about like the Trump slump, and I mean, being in the firearms industry, like, I hear this stuff constantly. Some people are, you know, having a tough time. Some companies are doing just fantastic. And then we see that these gun sales on Black Friday are like the second greatest we've ever had. And I think that says a lot. And I often wonder, and the more that I do this show specifically, the more I put tinfoil on my head to keep the thought police out, because I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe this slump, maybe this talking about the gun industry being down in the dumps, maybe it's not based in reality. Maybe it's this propaganda battle that I say we're constantly in with mainstream media and the other side. Maybe it's a little bit of that propaganda where they're trying to take guns out of the public zeitgeist and really minimalize their impact on society and how many there are. And then we see these numbers, which are, you know, from the FBI, and I think it's a good thing. Did you guys hear about the day drinking guy who was like trying to get the Boogaloo started in New York? All right. Well, shortly thereafter, the Anti-Defamation League posted an article on their website, adl.org, that says the Boogaloo, extremist new slang term for a coming civil war. And they talk about kind of where the term Boogaloo came from. And we all know, because I think we were around when this movie came out, Breakin' 2, the Electric Boogaloo. And, you know, they kind of talk about that, and then they talk about the Big Igloo. They miss a couple of the other ones, like, you know, the next Tremors movie and other things there. But I think it's very interesting. And then towards the end of the article, they talk about how the Boogaloo is also white supremacists are taking up the term. And something I've never heard mentioned in a racist way ever is now suddenly this racist. And they talk about the lyrics from a song from a white supremacist band, and just all kinds of other things. I don't know, like Rebecca, like the Boogaloo. I think it's pretty funny, but this article, they really try to push that racist agenda.
Oh, they absolutely did. That I'm convinced that was not by accident. Mm-hmm. They go through all of this stuff about, how dangerous it is and how bad all of us are that have anything to do with gun culture or anything. And then they tie in the racism. It's just standard. We're all pretty used to it by now. That being a racist used to actually mean something, and anymore it just means that you've disagreed with something.
Yeah, actually, I totally agree. Phil?
First of all, most people I know that are like, whether the varying degrees of like humor and seriousness, like talk about Boogaloo, I can't really call anyone more white supremacist or racist.
Same.
I mean, especially knowing the circles I run in, I run with a lot of preppers, and we kind of don't care what color your skin is or who you pray to. We really don't give a damn. We're really more interested in, can you survive by yourself, or are you going to be a person that I have to deal with when all hell breaks loose? That's all we really care about. But the problem here is that Boogaloo's been linked, intentionally or otherwise, to the gun culture and to libertarians and anarchists, and to basically anybody that for a moment questions that dear leader in the White House has any right to force down our throats his agenda, whether that's an R or a D that happens to be there at that moment. And all of us are wrong for having espoused that we have rights that should be respected by our government. So this is being drummed up as being a white supremacist thing, and they're lambasting the entire gun culture with it because we're wrong for questioning our leaders. Yeah. Of course, like you and I talked about once a long time ago, and I love to make people uncomfortable with it, but I'm like, the Second Amendment was written just to make sure we had guns in case we needed to shoot government officials in the face. Yeah, so, that's a really heavy point, but think about the war we fought for our own independence. We just got through shooting lots and lots of British people in the face because they were trying to take our rights.
Yeah.
So I like to point out to people, I'm like, there's a certain amount of like American heritage and tradition wrapped up in fighting in at protests against your government. It's an American tradition. It's what we do.
True. And it was actually this story that I mentioned on another show, We Like Shooting, where I talked about your book. I was like, yeah, okay, Boogaloo, let's talk about it. I think that a lot of people are just, big talkers and cowards, and they don't actually understand. But if you really want to kind of get an idea of what it actually means, when enough is enough, and once that first shot is fired, go read American Insurgent by Phil Rabelais. It's on Amazon. It's on Audible. It's all over the place. And I think it's an interesting read. And if you have thought about the word Boogaloo, if you've done any of those things, if you were up in arms about the guy in New York, even though it turned out that he's probably kind of a douche, go read that book. I think it's an important historical document.
Remind me to talk to you later about that incident. I won't say anything on the podcast. Just remind me to talk to you about that later.
All right, absolutely.
But my only aggravation is that Boogaloo wasn't a common used term when I was writing that book, because it would have been perfect to thread that in all over the place.
Absolutely. Reed, Reed, what are your thoughts here?
I am struck by the lengths to which some of these groups will go to tie in what I think are truly innocuous, pop culture, whatever cultural strata it relates to, and calling it, the evil of white supremacy. What's the okay sign that everybody tries to make you look at? I always thought that was flinch. I mean, if you looked at it, somebody hit you in the shoulder. I mean, I kind of recall that from being an elementary school age kid and having people do that. So I'm fairly sure that in my neighborhood, that was not white supremacy. That was just dumb kids. So.
Look, Reed.
No, I'm not going to look. No, I don't want you to. No, I'm not going to give you any excuses to pop me later. Anyways, but I mean, the point is that I look at this and these people are bending over backwards to associate Boogaloo with, and I don't want to make light of any racially or hate motivated death, but if you're going to associate this with a a paragon of white supremacy, you're going to attach it to a guy that only killed one person? I mean, I think there are some other people that the white supremacists are more in favor of than that. So, I mean, that's the closest they could get to tying it to white. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, how hard are you working to do this?
Yeah, look, if I wanted to vilify like an entire subsection of the United States, the first thing that I would do is associate them with things like this. So I take a term that they think of fondly, that they use, in their conversations, and they use in their documents and everything else. And I would start turning that in and really turning them into the villain when they use that term, because with us, we're like boogaloo, LOL. And then with somebody who's just very middle of the road, may not have any guns, may not necessarily believe in the Second Amendment, but also is an anti-gun, they kind of see this thing and they're like, oh no, boogaloo. I heard Phil saying boogaloo the other day. I wonder if he's a racist.
Yeah, sure am. I hate everybody.
Yeah, it's a battle of propaganda, and this is very smart. And coming from the ADL, it's not a surprise.
I don't think it is very smart, because here's something that I can't take credit for, but I love to bring it up whenever this subject comes out, because it really puts a point on things. Most people that are into like the boogaloo thing, those people that are hardcore Second Amendment advocates, and I'm making generalizations, but follow me down this road. You could describe them as more right-leaning, libertarian-esque types of people. People who think the government's ability to overpower us should be limited. People that think the government's power should be limited. People that think that like all people should have a right to self-defense, right to firearms, so on and so forth. The absolute last thing on earth a true white supremacist wants is to see African Americans and Hispanics and Jews armed and carrying guns, which is exactly what most people that are into boogaloo stuff, and most people that are hardcore libertarians, Second Amendment advocates, most of them espouse that. They don't care who owns guns. They just want everybody to have guns. Yeah. So that's why I always parrot this out. And I'm like, on its face, it's a dishonest argument, because a white supremacist does not want to see minorities armed. And most people that are, even in a joking way, espousing like people fighting against their government, they're not really into the government telling people they can't have guns, because it's kind of an issue with their mission statement. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
But doesn't it strike you that the likely result is everybody who is left-leaning but open-minded, they might have married a Republican, or they're willing to talk to their cousin who's a Republican, and they don't resort to violence. They look at this and see it as just a feeble attempt to do exactly what we're saying. I don't think they're swayed in any significant way. I mean, all they're basically doing is preaching to the choir, and that is, once again, how many standard deviations out on the fringe, and they're all squeaking the same tune. So.
Yeah, but the problem is throwing red meat to your base is a time-honored political tradition.
It is. No doubt.
I tend to believe that the media is definitely a tool of our government to preach propaganda. It sounds very 1984 Animal Farm, but the more we go down this road, the more I'm starting to think that Orwell had a freaking crystal ball.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. Next story is one that really offends me and makes me angry. ATF derails NFA fast track program. So what we've seen over the year of 2019 is when you submit your forms to the ATF for NFA devices such as suppressors, things like that they were taking anywhere between 9 and like 12 months to get your tax stamp back and pass everything there, and then they 4473 your NFA device to you. What we saw is they implemented a program that was basically fast track. And what that meant is that if it was an individual and it wasn't part of a trust and it was very simple and there were no mistakes, that they were moving it to the front of the line, because it's very, very, very quick to do. Not a big deal. Nothing crazy has to happen. And they were doing it. We were seeing suppressors come back in 70 days in some cases. So just a little over 2 months, which is huge, which is totally huge. Well, a bunch of people who were in the queue for like a month a year. And I understand, like, it sucks. Like, this system is broken. I hate this system, but this is the system that we live in until we figure out a way to get it changed. They complained about it so much that the ATF has now decided to cut this fast track program. They're just getting rid of it. So the people who were getting their suppressors back in 70 days, that is no more, no longer, no more. It makes me super mad. Rebecca, what do you think?
The fact that we have to ask permission in the first place just infuriates me. If we can have the fast track program, then I don't think that there's any reason to not just have a group of these people that only concentrate on those, and then have a group of other employees that concentrate on the more difficult ones. There's really, I mean, what would stop them from just allocating a few people to do the fast track ones?
Yeah. So right now they have
Working on the other ones.
Right. They have between 25 and 35 examiners, and they process between 180 to 200,000 applications every single year.
Right. So just take 3 or 4 and have them work on the quick, easy ones. It just doesn't seem like it makes any sense to do away with the program, unless it's just all about, we don't want you to have what you want.
Interesting.
There's a concept.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if that's the goal, then that would be why they've decided to renege on it.
Interesting. Reed, what do you think?
I think I'm going to have the controversial opinion, but I'm okay with it. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to wrap myself out. I'm the guy that moves into the right lane 6 miles back. And I'm the guy that will not let you get in front of me because you didn't do it 6 miles back.
That's fair.
I think that if you get in line, you get in line. And I'm sorry that your thing is simple, but I mean, it's like at the grocery store. You got 6 people in line. Do you let the old lady in the back with a carton of milk in front of everybody? I've been waiting here longer, lady.
That's fair.
Not my problem. That's your problem. Go find another line.
All right. Bill?
I don't have an opinion on the fast track list, honestly. To me, it's an answer to a question that should never been asked. The NFA should not have ever existed. It should have been struck down in 36. It should have been struck down a handful of times since then. There should be no NFA. There should be no permission slip to own firearms and firearm accessories, period, in discussion. Yeah. So, now, that being said, even taking for a moment, let's obfuscate the fact that I don't agree with the NFA in the first place. I don't think it should be there, but let's look at that for a second. Can you explain to me why the hell it takes 12 months to do a background check when NICS is the National Instant Check System, and they can determine in usually 90 seconds or less if you can buy a firearm, but it takes magically 12 months plus to determine if you can buy a suppressor or cut 3/4 of an inch off your 16-inch barrel legally? That just doesn't make any damn sense to me. There's no justification for why this process takes as long as it does, requires the volume of paperwork and bureaucracy to accomplish it. There's no justification for it. So my argument has always been, even if you think the government has a right to regulate firearms, and I need to grab you by the collar and show you this funny little document called the Bill of Rights before we have that conversation, but let's say for a moment I'll let you have that one. There's no justification for why this process takes this eye-bleeding long, except for the fact that government cannot be bothered to get it done in a timely fashion, because why on earth would they attribute resources to serving the freaking public that are their bosses?
Now, wait a minute. I'm going to point out, Phil, being an attorney who's dealt with the IRS, that this does not surprise me in the least.
Did I say
you. You asked, why does it take 12 months? I'll tell you why. Because the one file gets sent to the guy at a desk 3 buildings over. It takes, 6 weeks to go through interoffice mail because it's going through the Union Interoffice Mail Depot on the other side of the Potomac.
I'm liking less and less by the moment. It was a rhetorical question. I understand how it...
No, but I'll answer that question for you. I will tell you exactly why it takes 12 months.
I enlisted like you did. I know how inefficient government is. Jesus, I used to work for them.
Well, I think the military is far more efficient than the IRS.
The military is a pinnacle, Swiss watch precision compared to the government. But that's not making the case. That's making the case.
Well, and you realize how much of the NFA interfaces with the IRS?
Oh, you mean it's a revenue generating measure? That's an interesting concept. Because I thought putting a $200 tax stamp on a $5 shotgun sounded punitive or regulatory in intent. I've heard that.
What I'm saying is that they put the code provisions are part of the Internal Revenue Code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The tax stamp, the excise. I mean, of course it takes 12 months because they tied it to the IRS. If it was just the ATF and they didn't have to deal with the IRS, we'd be having them back in 3 or 4 days.
Well, but doesn't the FBI actually conduct the background check on ATF's behalf? Or am I getting?
Yeah, that's not where the backlog is.
Right, because you still have to 4473.
Catching the check, giving you a stamp.
Right, you still have to 4473 once your stamp comes back, which is the background check.
Look, all I'm saying is, even above and beyond the fact that I don't agree with the law in the first place, I find it incredibly insulting that the government tells you not only bend over and hand us your wallet, but then they say we're to give it to you slowly to make it hurt worse. Yeah. I'm sorry, but if I'm being screwed by my government, I'd at least like it to be done in a timely fashion at a time which is convenient for me.
Right.
I mean, let's not ask you too much.
No. Or at least a courtesy of a reach around, right?
I mean, like, at least take me out to dinner first. I mean, first. That's all I'm asking. I'm not unreasonable.
Something.
I don't like paying taxes, but I'll do it. I just wish you'd say please instead of give me your money or you die.
So I only had to give up basically all my freedom, but I just had a Form 3 submitted for 8 suppressors on December 2nd, and I got it back today. So I have 8 suppressors today. But, I had to give up my soul for an FFL and an SOT and all that. And
yeah, but just imagine how much more gratifying it would be if you could have gone out to your garage with a hacksaw and some water pipe and just made them yourself without having to ask for permission.
Yep.
Not that I would advocate breaking federal firearm laws for legal purposes.
Nope.
Yeah. Now, Phil, I think you're a lot closer to anarchist than you.
No, see,
2 millimeters.
A lot closer.
No. See, here's me in a nutshell. Like I understand that government is a necessary evil, but I like to point out it is an evil. Like, we should all be suspicious of our government. I don't care who's in power. I don't trust any of them. And if nobody else trusted them either, they behave themselves a lot better.
Good point. All right. Couple stories here that are related. Virginia. So they've introduced bills SB 64, Senate Bill 64 and SB 16. One will confiscate guns and won't grandfather any. They want to take away pretty much most semi-automatics, and that would include actual confiscation and no grandfathering. It would outlaw basically anything that didn't load a magazine of the capacity that they approve into the grip, which made me laugh because today I was shooting some high point carbines and they load the magazine into the grip. I was like, so yeah, when everyone's an outlaw, all the outlaws will have high points. So good call there. And then the other one, SB 64,
so hard.
would make firearm training a felony. And this one, I think, is actually on the books and has been for quite a while. And they just changed some of the verbiage of it. But basically, it's any kind of organization or training that is for the purpose of civil disorder, in air quotes, which is specifically what they are. But yeah, Virginia went blue, and immediately they started with just some of the most draconian gun laws that I have seen. Rebecca, what do you think?
It's just blatant infringement. I mean, you can't call it anything else. It's, for one, you shouldn't have to ask permission for certain types of firearms. We all know that. It says arms for a reason. But then to go the step further and actually begin looking at the law again, where it would make it illegal to train, that would mean that if I lived in Virginia and I took my kids out and showed them firearm safety, that would be illegal. I could be arrested because I don't want my kids to hurt themselves. I don't know. This whole thing is just infringement. And I can't even imagine how we've allowed, not just Virginia, but I mean, nationwide, how we've allowed ourselves to get to this point. The training is necessary. It's protection of ourselves. That's why we have the Second Amendment, so that we can protect ourselves. And if you're not going to allow training, then what kind of protection is that?
Yeah. It's a pretty interesting time. Phil, what are your thoughts here?
You just had to ask, didn't you?
I did.
I mean, bearing in mind that I wrote a book which basically, like, within the first, Sean, like 8 pages, kicks off with a person's firearms being seized in a no-knock raid and government agents coming to people's doors. Like, when I wrote that book, it was really meant to be a cautionary note. It was meant to be fictional. It was meant to make people think. It wasn't meant to turn into it wasn't meant to turn into a damned history book. It It wasn't meant to turn into modern events. So the more Virginia pushes down this path, the more nervous I get by the day, because the truth of the matter is that it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that when you put police on a collision course with this many armed people, sooner or later, something bad's going to happen. And it honestly, it almost doesn't matter who comes out on top or who comes out on bottom. You're still going to have citizens taking up arms against their local law enforcement, because there are some people out there just playing the odds. There's like 330 million people out there. Half of them have guns, according to the statistics. But there's got to be at least a handful of them out there. You call it 1%. That's still 1 million people with guns that don't think the government can take them from them.
Wait a minute. I thought that was 3.3 million.
Does it matter? What's the difference between 1 million people with guns ready to shoot people in the face to keep them in 3 million? I mean, it doesn't make the point is that you're still talking about an incredible amount of violence that can be unleashed on these local communities if they continue to push this issue. And the thing that's really frustrating me is that they keep saying that they're doing this in the name of public safety. They keep saying they want to stop gun violence. Well, I got news for you. You are absolutely inciting gun violence, because the people you're about to go take these guns from are not the people shooting up communities and hurting people. But there are people out there that are fully prepared to take up arms to defend themselves if they feel like they're being assaulted. And if you just left them the hell alone, they wouldn't hurt anybody. So I'm not okay with any of this. Stephen Smith just said, 2 million. Again, does it matter if it's 1, 2, or 3 million? I mean, seriously, 1 million people with guns is not that's an army in most countries. Hell, in some countries, it's the whole country and 2 of their neighbors. I mean, it's worrying. It worries me because I know enough of my country's own history to know that a large percentage of people will stand on the sidelines and allow their rights to be stripped from them and their neighbors. But there are people out there that will not. And the problem is those people that will not are having rocks thrown at them. And if you keep inciting it, sooner or later, you're going to get what you're asking for. And I don't want to see it happen.
Yeah.
I wrote a book hoping that I'd sell 10 million copies, not for my own edification, but because I was hoping 10 million people would read the damn thing and think twice. But apparently, as soon as I can get logged into my account, I'm going to try to run a book sale on to knock the price down 99 cents. Maybe some people will pick it up.
Yeah, I've been recommending it a lot lately just because I'm like, hey, everyone wants to talk about the Boogaloo, and I am of the mind that everyone who says Boogaloo on the internet, 99% of them are cowards that never do anything, which is why nobody showed up at the New York dude, which is why nobody showed up at Raid Area 51. Like, people just talk crap online and don't actually get involved, don't do anything. They don't get involved not only with this kind of stuff, they don't get involved in the voting process, they don't get involved in fighting for our individual rights. They just want to rely on the NRA. And when the NRA doesn't want to do it, they just make a bunch of memes and do a bunch of stuff and never get off their butts and just sit there in their basements or on their couch or whatever and do actually nothing. And this book, I'm like, okay, you want to talk about the Boogaloo, just understand what it's going to be. And your book is a great illustration of that, like what it would be like and the stress and the pressure. And like when you decide that your life now is this, like people in Hong Kong have decided, like people in Venezuela have decided, like people all over the history of this earth have decided, when you decide that enough is enough and you decide that you're no longer going to sit, you're not going to watch The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. You're not going to, go to the grocery store in Walmart. You're going to live on the run. You're going to live only as long as you live until you make a mistake or until you come across somebody smarter than you. It's an interesting look.
But at the end of the day, the thing that people really should pay more attention to when they look at Hong Kong and Venezuela is you're seeing a level of violence perpetrated by the civilians on their government that is quite frankly startling. And these are unarmed people. In Hong Kong, they're using bows and arrows. Put AR-15s in all those hands, and can you imagine the freaking carnage that could be unleashed? I mean, that's the thing that I always try to point out to people who are like way out in crazy land. Let's take everybody's guns by force. Let's send the cops to your doors. Come do it. I'm like, do you have any earthly idea how ugly a civil war looks like? Have you seen pictures of what happens in sub-Saharan Africa? Have you seen what happened in freaking Bosnia and Kosovo? Have you seen what happens in a civil war? Everyone gets blood on them. Nobody comes out of it clean. Nobody comes out unscathed. It is an awful thing to see, and I've never seen it firsthand. I've seen just the edge of it while I was in Iraq. And there were parts of that country that were absolutely at war with itself. And I've got news for you. No one came out unscathed. From 8 months old to 80 years old, everyone came out bloody. So if you want to see that in your country, if you are that dead set on gun control, you're willing to push this country into civil war, if you're willing to see 1 million of your fellow citizens murdered in their homes by their government, then you're a psychopath. And by the way, I'm the guy who says everyone should have cruiser weapons and rocket launchers because I believe in the Second Amendment, but I don't plan on hurting anybody because no one's trying to hurt me right this moment. So I'm not the crazy one.
I love it. All right, guys, that is all the time we have for the stories tonight. Sorry, Phil, what?
We didn't hear from Reed.
I thought we did. Reed, I'm so sorry.
No.
Reed, you're going to finish
Phil,
this
thank you
off.
for advocating for me.
Yes. Yes. Reed, I want you to finish this off.
So I am an optimist. You know, Phil talks about the people that are the cowards that are going out there and talking up a good storm. I think that there are millions upon millions of people that do not get on the internet, do not have memoirs, and do not talk about all the awesome stuff they're going to do when it all hits the fan. I think those people are quiet. They live their lives. They do what they know they need to do to be ready. They're not going to telegraph themselves to anybody, but they're going to stand next to you when it starts going south. So I'm an optimist. I don't think it's going to drag on too long. I think it's going to be resolved quickly, and I think it'll be resolved the way that we think it should be resolved. But this kind of stuff, yeah, I'm upset by it, but I think in the grand scheme of things that it's not going to go far. Even if they pass it into law, if the Supreme Court comes in and expands what they've already discussed in the Heller cases, this stuff's going to be struck down immediately. It will not be valid. I mean, it's this giant balancing act of all of these different intersecting pieces that, in the grand scheme of things, I think are slowly rolling our way. Not as fast as we want, but I don't think that they're going in a bad direction. Now, if we get a couple of liberal justices on the court, then we can all move to Costa Rica and create banana republics. But for now, I'm still optimistic and hopeful.
Yeah. See, the one thing that makes me nervous about that, Reed, because admittedly I'm a cynic. It's my thing. It's my hat.
Well, I'm a lawyer. I'm automatically a cynic.
Oh, kindred spirit. But see, the thing that makes me very nervous about this whole situation is, you know, I live down in the New Orleans metro area now. And during Katrina, I've talked to people firsthand had firearms taken from them at gunpoint by local law enforcement. And like, people could talk all day long about who was involved and who wasn't. I can tell you that I was in Louisiana National Guard at the time. We never got an order to take firearms from civilians. I wouldn't have accepted it had we. And I had a well-deserved reputation at the time of, you know, causing trouble for leadership. So it would not have been the first time I pissed them off not doing what they told me to do because I didn't think it was right. But my whole bend is that, you know, I've talked to people firsthand who've had this happen to them. So I would like to think that if SCOTUS put their foot down, it would have some weight. But I think governments will get away with what they think they can get away with. And if a house-by-house gun search isn't yielding the fruit they want, I think they'll push their agenda another way.
You know what? I tend to agree with you, but here's the thing. When the Supreme Court said that they were going to allow schools to be integrated, what did they do? They put people who would follow their orders on those campuses. And I don't fear that the Supreme Court will not make that happen again if they feel that their rulings are not being adhered to.
I hope so.
Interesting. Good stuff.
I don't have a lot of faith in the Supreme Court or our government at any level at this stage. I think they're going to push their own agenda, and their agenda has not been to march us back from the precipice that we find ourselves at. Their agenda has been slow, constricting, additional restrictions on freedom. It's been going on for 100 years. We've never gone backwards. We've always gone towards that further restriction. And they've never shown a willingness to admit or recognize that they've done wrong. So I would like to be the optimist, but unfortunately I'm the person that says they've doubled down every single time. Why won't they double down again? And I want to be proven wrong. Like if somebody on SCOTUS listens to this, please get a hold of me through the internet. You and me can sit down and talk on a podcast. You can tell me how wrong I am. I would love to be proven wrong, but I haven't been yet.
Love it. Guys, this was an awesome discussion. I really appreciate all of your contributions here tonight. Before we leave, I want to hear kind of what you guys have been up to and where people can find you online. And Phil, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm in my regular haunt, the Matter of Facts podcast. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can find us on social media at the Facebook page and our Facebook group, Matter of Facts group. We have a page over on Patreon, have an Instagram account. I'm sure I'm missing something else. I also have a Facebook page for that's called Author Phil Rabelais, and that's where you can find more news about American Insurgent, or American Insurgent. American Insurrection is the book I'm still working on, hopefully to come out early next year. I would say for your listeners, and I'll have to spread this around, keep your eye on that book in the near future because there might be a price drop coming. I was just looking at when I can actually run the next promo, and it's not today, or I do it right now, but it's coming up shortly.
Cool, man. Love it. And I recommend the book for anyone out there who thinks about this stuff. Like it's a really interesting look into the thing that we end up talking about a lot these days. Phil, thank you, man. I appreciate.
Christmas is coming up, so feel free to buy a copy for your local politicians.
There you go. I love it. Oh, that's a great idea.
Isn't it though?
I want to start a
Wait a
GoFundMe.
minute. Doesn't Beto think that's a threat?
Good.
I don't care what Beto thinks. See, that's the beautiful thing about living in a constitutional republic. I don't have to care that much about what my elected representatives think. They're not my leader. They're not my
Wait a minute. What's he elected to do now?
Well, currently nothing, but he was
good.
Aspirational.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of living in this country. I don't have to care what he thinks.
Yep. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you?
All right. Let's see. Facebook, Rebecca 1MMAGC. That's for 1 Million Moms Against Gun Control. And then, I also have an Instagram that's just Rebecca Schmoe.
Oh man. Schmoe. I swear I've been saying your name wrong the entire night. I'm so sorry.
Everybody always does.
Schmoe.
It's not a deal. It's not my maiden name, so it's not a big deal to me.
Schmoe.
All right. I'm also with To the Republic. And so, you guys can check out that podcast at totherepublic.us.
I love it. And I've listened to some episodes.
We're having a great time.
Awesome.
Tim and I are having a great time with that.
Rebecca, I 99.9%, if I'm even remotely unsure about how a name is said, I ask so that I don't make this mistake and then feel like a jackass for the rest of the night. I am so sorry. Schmoe.
No, honestly, it's not a big deal. People that I have known the entire time I've had this name, they mispronounce it all the time. It's really, my kids don't even respond negatively when somebody mispronounces their name. They're just like, yeah, whatever, that's me. So,
Rebecca Schmoe.
like boy.
I'm an amazing host. Absolutely the worst. Reed, and for those out there that don't actually know, I listened to the AR-15 podcast back before I ever did podcasts. Like Reed was one of the guys that I kind of really looked up to. And I listened to the AR-15 podcast for a long time before I ever started any of my podcasts. And it's so great to see you again. It's so great to have you here. Where can people find you?
Now I'm kind of verklempt. I don't know what to say, Sean. I had no idea.
Yeah, no, man. I absolutely 100% did.
So, I've had a big career change. My co-host is having some big life changes. So the show's been kind of, it's been intermittent this summer, but I've got a bunch of audition tapes in. I'm trying to go through those, getting a new host online. My career change has settled down. I've gone into the corporate side of the law, so it's nice to have a paycheck instead of being unemployed. But I think probably here before too long, I'll be putting out weekly shows again. And I've been absent long enough to be a lot of new things I can cover instead of having to, scrounge for stuff to talk about.
That's awesome, man. I'm really excited. I know all the listeners of the AR-15 podcast are excited too. And do you have like your personal social media that people can check out, or is it just AR-15 podcast, Firearms Radio Network stuff?
Well, let's see. I've got an Instagram of my own that I'm really bad at. My daughter's much better at Instagram than I am, but it's oh crap, what is it? It's something with Reed Snyder, and it says I'm the aspirational podcaster. So
awesome.
amateur podcasters. So there's that. And then there's all the air-15 podcast.com. We have Facebook and we have Instagram and a bunch of other things I'm still not any good at. But, yeah, there's a lot of places to look for. Don't look in any of the, county, criminal records. I don't want to be found there. So.
No, never.
No.
All right. That's awesome, man. I'm so glad to have all three of you guys. It has been excellent discussion. I was really, really enjoyed it all the way. So go check them out. We got Reed Snoider, Rebecca Schmoe, and Phil Roybele. They're all available. Phil is not amused. Seriously. Phil is not amused. I've been thinking up that joke for like 5 minutes.
You butchered my name enough the first time I came on this show. It took you 2 shows to get it right.
I know. I am literally the worst. Thanks to all the listeners who put up with me every single week, and thanks to all the great panelists this week. Don't forget, go check us out on iTunes, leave us reviews, check out the Patriot Patch Company and Second Call Defense, patriotpatch.co and firearmsradio.tv/SCD. This Week in Guns is produced by Kenny Ortega and Ben Allreed and is a production of the Firearms Radio Network. And guys, I will check you next week.